Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. We're going to do Chapter 6 from Tim Snyder's groundbreaking graphic novel on tyranny. Let's throw it on the screen over there for a minute. That's the cover of the book, On Tyranny, and that's the original 2017 was this little pocket guide, 20 Lessons for the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder, who's a professor of history at Yale University. He's been translated into over 40 languages, has about 15 different books out, and he's one of the world's leading authorities on the rise of authoritarianism in the 20th century. And the book was turned into this graphic novel this last year with a marvelous plethora of really poignant pictures in this. This is this chapter that we're dealing with today. And the chapter we're dealing with today is got to do with be wary of paramilitaries. So let me put the, we'll get the picture of the chapter cover, the drawing up there. If my screen comes up, and sometimes the screen comes up not so quickly and sometimes quicker. And right now, not so quickly. Okay, there it is. All right, be wary of paramilitaries. While the men with guns who have always claimed to be against the system start wearing uniforms and marching with torches and pictures of a leader, the end is nigh. When the pro-leader paramilitary and the official police and military intermingle, the end has come. If you remember the images from Charlottesville just a few years back, when Trump notoriously, infamously said, you know, there's some good people on both sides of the camp here. They were marching with their torches. There were Nazi flags, American flags, Nazi flags, Confederate flags, pictures of Donald Trump, Make America Great Again. There was a whole intermingling of this Trump phenomena in the middle of people with torches. So he was spot on. Timothy seems to be spot on in his analysis of what's been happening here. Now, he opens up the chapter by talking about how the government, most governments, monopolize violence. Violence is monopolized by the government. You can't have paramilitary groups out there and have the government. So the government has the army and it has the police forces on its side, and that's who enforces the rule of law, who makes sure you've got the democratic elections, and they put the systems of democracy, they keep the democracy functioning. If you've got a paramilitary group that's against the government and they start fighting each other, well, then you're in the midst of like a civil war. The groups that you can wind up on the sideline here are either paramilitary groups, or you can have the bodyguards for a particular leader, or you can wind up with a citizen, what looks like a citizen's initiative to organize a whole group of people. But in most cases, it's a party in back of them that's funding them. And I'm thinking of the Tea Party movement from almost 20 years ago now. And it looked like it was this spontaneous uprising of people. Well, it wasn't spontaneous at all. It was the Koch brothers were in back of this thing, and they were funding it and pulling out buses and everything like that. Well, the same thing with the January 6th insurrection. They weren't all paramilitary people that were there. There were a lot of just regular kind of people that attended that rally, and many of them got there on buses that were funded by the organizers of the group. All right, moving on to on the next page in the chapter, what he talks about is how the armed groups start off outside the law and wind up becoming the law. And in the case of Hitler and his stormtroopers, Hitler had his stormtroopers, which were basically his personal security detail. And what they would do is they would go into a hall and they would clear out anybody who wasn't pro-Hitler at the time. And they would get them out of the hall. They'd clear them out of the place. Does this sound familiar? They weren't a legitimate armed force at the time. They were his private security detail. Well, as by the time 1938 comes along, this is 6 years later after he started with them in 1932. By 1938, when they start to move into Austria and then into Poland, Then the concentration camps. Well, the SS winds up running the concentration camps, and in many cases, they wind up taking over for the law enforcement in these other countries that are collapsing as the Nazis are moving in. So they sort of start off outside the law, they transcend themselves into the law, and then they become above the law at the end of the day. The SS was notoriously above the law. They were a law unto themselves. Now, the mini problem that we have here in America is that a lot of the state activities have been privatized out. A lot of the prisons have been privatized to corporations. Are running a good portion of the prisons in this country today. And just like the Hessians during the Revolutionary War came over from Germany, well, we have our own Hessians here now in the form of Eric Prince and his Blackwater group. I'm not sure what their name is this month. They've changed names about once a year when people find out who they are. And Eric Prince is related to Betsy DeVos, and he's been supplying private military forces to the wars in the Middle East for the last decade, to say at the very least, and to wars in South America and all over the country, all over the world. So these guys have been in the business of war with a lot of people in our government who have been in the business of war. But a lot of it's been privatized out, and that's a real shaky situation there. But what was novel about all this was in 2016, for the first time, Trump's private security forces were helping to rout people out of the rallies that he was having. So if there was a rally and there was somebody at the rally, say, that started to talk against him, well, his people would get right around them, and then they would start booing the person. Then the crowd would jump in, and the crowd would start booing the person. Then they would start yelling, USA, 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 and then they would violently throw the person out. And this was becoming a regular feature at the Trump rallies. At one point, Trump is looking down and he's, oh, there's a remnant left over there. Get that remnant out of here, he says, with the viciousness of a schoolyard bully, this guy. And he winds up at the end of one of his rallies saying, isn't this more fun than a regular rally? This guy's nuts. So he's inciting people to violence, and then he's egging them on by saying, isn't this a lot more fun? Well, the groups we have, I'm going to come over here to the board for a second. I'll take down the Tyranny, move the red cover. And we got here a couple of pictures, not a lot, just a couple of pictures that I pulled off the internet the other day. And this is Donald at a rally. Yeah, let me bring myself into it. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so there's Donald at a rally. I mean, if this guy doesn't look like a schoolyard bully, who does? These are the Oath Keepers over here on the left, on my right side, and over here on my left side are Proud Boys here, Proud Boys here. More pictures of Trump pointing out people at rallies for everybody to go after. Same thing over here. And then these are a few more of the Proud Boys here, and this is the January 6th insurrection. Over here with the Oath Keepers, you'll notice they're all, this was the group you famously saw after January 6th. With they're marching through with each one of them holding the shoulder of the fellow before them. And this is a military move to allow a group of people to snake through a crowd holding on to each other before them so somebody can't come through and break into their ranks and disperse the group. So the group over here that we're looking at, these are the Oath Keepers. Now the Oath Keepers are a far-right anti-government militia. A far-right anti-government militia. 2/3 of them are ex-military. 2/3, 67% are ex-military or law enforcement, and 10% of them in the group today are active ex-military, are active military or law enforcement. So they're very, very militant-centered group, and there's a minimum of 5,000 and maybe as much as 40,000 of them in the organization. The Proud Boys, on the other hand, that was the group on the left side over there. the Proud Boys over there. They're a little bit weirder, to say the least. They are a far-right, neo-fascist, mostly male, pretty much white. They don't believe in no pornography, no masturbation. They are incels. And incels are involuntary celibates. And they've been around for over a decade. And this was a group of, I think it's sort of, actually the origins of the word are rather interesting and almost antithetical to what they became, but in today's day and age, they're involuntarily celibate. They're usually white males who have been rejected by women in one way or another, and therefore start to get very misogynistic and anti-women because they couldn't get a date. They're probably a bunch of dorks. They couldn't get a date, and so they wind up taking it out on the women who didn't want to date them, and they become involuntarily celibate. So there you go. There are at least 300 and as many as 6,000 of these. So the numbers vary greatly depending on who's doing the count. And interestingly, 300 to 6,000 is what the numbers were about 3 days ago when during the Ukrainian war here, the amount of Russian deaths were reported. And the low number that was reported by Russia was 300, and the high number that was being reported by the Ukrainians was closer to 6,000. I don't know what the number is, but it's somewhere in between there. So that's a little bit what I wanted to talk about was the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. And the good news is that the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers are under, let me get rid of that. And put this up here. And where is it? Yeah, there it is. Okay, so we got the first trial in the Capitol riot ends in a conviction on all counts. Conviction on all counts. And it was one headline. And then right next to it in the paper was, well, I'll put him up in the middle, was this guy over here who is the leader of the Proud Boys, and his name is Henry Theriault. And they both made the paper on the same day today, which was really positive news, I thought. So the Capitol riot ends, and this was considered this trial going on in Washington was considered sort of the canary in the mine shaft. Depending on what happened in this trial was depending on how they were going to go ahead prosecuting the rest of these cases. And the fact that this guy's convicted on all counts, I believe his kids were involved with helping getting him arrested because they were so disgusted with his behavior. So that's good news there. And the Proud Boy leader being arrested, he wasn't even there at the riot when it happened. He was ordered out of Washington because he had been arrested on another charge. He was vandalizing a Black Lives Matter church or something earlier. And he's ordered by the judge to leave Washington, D.C. Well, he doesn't leave Washington, D.C. He violates what he's supposed to do. And he hangs around, and he's literally caught. They have him caught on in a camera in a garage, conspiring with a whole bunch of other people who were involved with the riot the next day. So he's being charged with conspiring to bring the riot about, although he wasn't even at the riot, but he was one of the organizers that was there. The last thing I'm going to talk about is an essay by Timothy Snyder. Had an essay that was published just today, and the title is Russia Invades Ukraine. And he's talking about how, in a sense, the European Union was originally sort of formed as a defense against aggression during the Cold War. And the European Union needs to re-solidify itself today, seeing what's going on in Ukraine right now. Seeing what's going on, the European Union needs to get its act together and re-solidify its original intention to prevent a war from breaking out, or to stop those that are taking a war out against them. And one of the weird things that Putin has been running around with, he's been saying that he's going to denazify Ukraine. He's going to denazify Ukraine. He's also claiming that Ukraine is an artificial state, much like he said about what Hitler said about Poland, that it was also an artificial state. Putin is claiming that Ukraine is an artificial state and that they are the ones that are threatening him, and he's going to go in there and denazify the place. And in Ukraine, in 2019, 70% of the people voted to elect a Jewish president. So the democracy there was really strong. They got rid of the guy that was on Putin, that was Putin's strongman. They got him out of there. They elected this guy, who's this Jewish president, by more than 70% of the vote. Now, Hannah Arendt, who is my, here it is. This is a book that gets quoted frequently. This is On Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt, that's how you pronounce the name, is what I found out. And this book was published in 1950s. She worked on it for quite a while before that. And they're talking about how language works and Putin's attempt to turn language on its head. A big lie is a challenge to reality, which is to be bent by violence. A big lie is a kind of challenge to reality, which is to be bent by violence. So killing a Jewish president and destroying a Ukrainian democracy in the name of denazification would show that words mean whatever the leader says they mean. Putin right now in Russia is attempting to ban the use of the word war on any news outlet. You're not allowed to say the word war. Most of the news outlets have been shut down. Anybody that wasn't a state-run news outlet is gone right now in Russia, and all they're getting is one voice of one big lie that they keep repeating over and over again in an attempt to keep the Russian people in back of Putin while he continues his ridiculous and obscene war of aggression. So the moral language of World War II is being used as a revival of totalitarianism in the 21st century. Alrighty, peace, patience, persistence, and we'll do it again next week. Thanks for joining me.